Welcome to Alien Heights Network. I'm your host, Divine Gastaway from Big Bad Baloo Senior High School BBB Production. The Washington Teaching Union has launched a major initiative called Learning Doesn't Stop Lessons on TV. First, let's check out Rachel Thomas from Bunker Hill Elementary School. Our second lesson will be conducted by Mr. Catapano from Lafayette Elementary School. Let's see what we learned today.
Hi, welcome back to another Wednesday. I hope everyone enjoyed their Teacher Appreciation Week like I did. And of course, I want to thank my first teacher, my mom. Well, today we're going to do 5th grade social studies, week 8, day 1 and 2. We have 2 really fun activities to get working on. The materials you may need for this lesson are a notebook, the learning plan if you have one, a colored utensil so you can annotate the text, and also a writing utensil for your text-dependent questions and your activity. All right, so we're working on Unit 4, Change is Gonna Come, Renaissance and Rights. How does society become more equal? This image is from the March on Washington in 1963. Our first supporting question, how can government leaders help society become more equal? The source and task. Read and annotate source A, Desegregation of the Armed Forces, and complete comprehension questions, pages 3 and 4. So, of course, if you're following along in the learning plan, you know what to do. If not, grab your notebook and get ready. Source background. As the Great Depression began to finally end, the United States entered a new crisis, World War II. In future U.S. history courses, you will learn more about the war and its aftermath. This distance learning plan, which focuses on civil rights, will highlight how some government leaders, individuals, and organizations acted in ways that made America a more equal country, especially for African Americans who experienced tremendous discrimination and racism. Today, you will examine an action by President Harry Truman, who assumed office when President Franklin Roosevelt died right before the end of World War II. Source A, Desegregation of the Armed Forces. After 1869, segregation was also the norm in the United States Armed Forces. This policy remained intact through the Spanish-American War and World War I. It was not seriously challenged until World War II. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, known as the NAACP, an organization we will study more about on day 3, and other African American leaders pointed out the hypocrisy of African Americans who themselves were victims of racism, fighting against similar policies in Nazi Germany. Military necessity helped break down racial barriers. Due to a lack of fighting men, African American troops were asked to fight alongside white troops, beginning with the Battle of the Bulge, a major battle that occurred in Europe. Despite the fact that they served in separate platoons or teams, this experience displayed the abilities of African American soldiers and helped encourage the Army to break with its segregationist policies. In 1948, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, directing the U.S. Armed Forces to desegregate as quickly as possible. The order said, "It is hereby now declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin, country where a person was born. This policy shall be put into effect as rapidly as possible." By the end of the Korean War in 1953, the U.S. military was almost completely integrated. This source came from modified from the Maryland State Department of Education and Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture. If you're following along with your learning plan, you should have annotated the text because that's what good readers do. If you're following along with a notebook, by all means, go ahead and write down the question and then just review the video to find your text evidence. Comprehension question number 1. What types of discrimination did African Americans face after 1869? Number 2. Why did integration begin during World War II? Number 3. What was the impact of President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948? How did his action as a government leader make America more equal? All right, so now let's get ready for day 2. Again, our line of inquiry is, how does society become more equal? As seen below is the image from the March on Washington, 1963. Now for supporting question number 2. How do individual citizens help society become more equal? Your source and task for today. You're going to read and annotate source B, Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, and complete the sentence expansion because, but, so activity. And if you're following along in the learning plan, these are pages 5 and 7. If not, again, use your notebook and follow along in the video. Source background. Despite President Truman's action with the military, many government officials were against integration. Many leaders, especially in the southern United States, supported segregation, which means legally enforcing people of different races to be kept apart, such as by having separate entrances to buildings, having different places to sit on trains and buses, and different schools for children to attend. Individuals began to take brave actions that inspired other individuals to speak out against this type of inequality. Source B, Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. When Rosa Parks refused on the afternoon of December 1st, 1955, to give up her bus seat so that a white man could sit, it is unlikely that she fully realized the forces that she had set into motion and the controversy that would soon swirl around her. Other Black women had similarly refused to give up their seats on public buses and had even been arrested, including 2 young women earlier that same year in Montgomery, Alabama. But this time the outcome was different. Unlike those earlier incidents, Rosa Parks' courageous refusal to bow to an unfair law sparked a crucial chapter in the civil rights movement in the United States, the Montgomery bus boycott. "I didn't get on the bus with the intention of being arrested," she often said later. "I got on the bus with the intention of going home." Pressures had been building in Montgomery for some time to deal with public transportation practices that treated Blacks as second-class citizens. Those pressures were increased when a 15-year-old girl, Claudette Colvin, was arrested on March 2nd, 1955, for refusing to give up her seat to a white person. Colvin did not violate the city bus policy by not relinquishing her seat. She was not sitting in the front seat served for whites, and there was no other place for her to sit. Even under the double standards of the bus seating policy at the time, Blacks sitting behind the white reserve section in a bus were only required to give up their seats to whites if there was another seat available for them. But despite not breaking law, by her refusal to give up her seat, Colvin was still convicted. Some of the city's Black leaders thought that they had missed an opportunity for more serious action following the Colvin arrest. So, when Parks was arrested a few months later, the stage was already set for a boycott, which meant people refused to ride the bus as a way to protest. Responding to the arrest of Parks was E.D. Nixon, a Pullman train porter who had led the state chapter of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Nixon had worked for better conditions for Blacks for decades. With the help of white attorney Clifford Durr, Nixon bailed Mrs. Parks out of jail on the evening of December 1st. He then persuaded her to allow her case to be used to challenge the city's bus segregation policy. After leaving the Parks home, Nixon talked on the telephone with Alabama State College professor Joe Ann Robinson. Nixon spent the late evening talking on the telephone to many of the more prominent Black leaders of Montgomery. Robinson, who was president of the Women's Political Council, a group of Black women who lobbied the city and state on Black issues, had been pushing for a bus boycott for months. She saw an opportunity and took it. They wrote and distributed a flyer that read, Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown in jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus for a white person to sit down. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too. For if Negroes did not ride the buses, they could not operate. 3/4 of the riders are Negroes, yet we are arrested or have to stand over empty seats. If we do not do something to stop these arrests, they will continue. Nixon spent that Friday morning calling to recruit those whose leadership he felt was essential. Among them were the Reverend Ralph Abernathy and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. King, after some hesitation, agreed to participate. December 5th was an historic day. The boycott began. Rosa Parks was tried in city court and convicted. The initial meeting of what would become the Montgomery Improvement Association was held, and a mass meeting of Black citizens made history. That Monday dawned cold but clear. Morning buses that normally would be crowded with Blacks heading to work throughout the city were essentially empty. Instead, many Blacks gathered near the bus stops waiting for rides. Interestingly, many of those rides came from whites whose primary interest was getting their domestic employees to their homes or other workers to their places of business. Other Blacks rode Negro taxis, with many drivers giving reduced fares that day. Thousands more walked to work and school. Participation far exceeded the best hopes of the boycott leaders. The historic Montgomery bus boycott had begun. It would last for 381 days. Researchers estimate that some 17,000 Blacks took part in the boycott initially, although the numbers quickly grew because of action by the bus system itself. Shortly after the boycott ended, King claimed that 42,000 Blacks took part. Now for the activity. This is a great way to summarize what you've read. You can use this process to vary the sentences you write when you're writing other assignments. Now, when you're reading each sentence, you want to look at what the conjunction is asking. So let's start with the first one. In 1955, some individual citizens of Montgomery wanted more equality because, well, when you answer, you're going to fulfill the why. Why did they want more equality? Then, in the next sentence, prompt number 2, in 1955, some individual citizens of Montgomery wanted more equality, but. Now, the but shows the impact of the scenario or situation. You're going to be answering what was holding them back from getting the equality that they wanted. Then, when you move on to in 1955, some individual citizens of Montgomery wanted more equality. So, you're going to detail what action was taken. What was their next step to make sure that they got the equality that they sought? There will be more because, but, and so writing activities on the WTU Local 6 website posted with this video. And that is our time. It has been another great discussion of social studies. It is important to remember those that fought and continue to fight for our freedoms. As always, remember that more information and resources can be found at WTULocal6.net. Remember to stay home and stop the spread. And I look forward to you joining me again next week because the learning doesn't stop.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Mr. Catapano again, a 5th grade teacher at Lafayette Elementary School, and I'm here today to talk to you about different types of polygons, how to define them, and how to organize them into different groupings. So today we're going to talk about shapes such as rectangles and squares and rhombi and a whole bunch of different kinds of things. So we're going to learn about the definitions of those shapes and then how to classify them. So here we go!
Okay, so today we're going to be learning about how we are going to define and classify polygons. I'd like to give a special shout out to my teammate, Mr. David Gregel, another 5th grade teacher at Lafayette Elementary School who teaches math with me, for helping me out with this PowerPoint presentation. So thank you so much, Mr. Gregel. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is how classification works, okay? When we classify things, they can be in a general classification, and then we can get more and more specific as we move forward. So here's an example of that. If someone asked me, where were you born? I might say that I was born in New Jersey. course, if the student replies, where else were you born? That might be a kind of a confusing question, right? But how could I respond? Well, I could say that I was born in New Jersey, but I was also born in the United States because New Jersey is in the United States. I could say I was born in North America because the US is in North America. I could say I was born on Earth because North America is located on Earth. The solar system, because that's where the Earth is, the Milky Way, because that's where the solar system is, or the universe, because that's where the Milky Way is. So I want you to kind of think about classification and how that works when we classify shapes. Here, for example, we look at polygons. Excuse me. So when we look at polygons, let's take a look at the composition of the word itself. The word poly means many, and gon meaning angles. So that all of these shapes that we're going to look at today are all shapes that have many angles. And if we look specifically at the definition, a polygon is a closed plane figure with 3 or more sides that are all straight. The exception here on the ones that we are looking at are circles, because circles are not shapes that have any straight sides. So it can't possibly be a polygon. So I'm going to take a look at the ones on the left, and I'm going to see that these are all polygons because they fit our definition, but the ones over here don't. Because again, circles don't have any sides, and this shape here is just 2 shapes adjacent to each other. They don't have any correlation, and therefore they're not a closed plane figure, which is why these 2 do not fit our definition of polygons. So let's look at all of these shapes. You see they all have letters assigned to them, and so the question here is it a polygon? So some shapes have been misplaced here on the left. It says all of these shapes are polygons, but they can't possibly be. So let's find them and sort them on the proper side. So which shapes do you see here that are not polygons? You can just identify them by the letter. So you're looking for shapes that do not have all straight sides or are closed plane figures, or both. That's right, letter P is a circle. So that has no sides. That can't be a polygon. Yep, letter O. Letter O, I see maybe 2 straight sides. I see this one here and this one down here. But other than that, it's predominantly a circle, so that doesn't work. Any others? That's right, letter Q. Letter Q is also not a polygon because it is not a closed plane figure. Good job. Now let's talk about quadrilaterals. Quadrilaterals are shapes that are polygons, but more specifically though, they are a 4-sided figure. So quad means 4 and lateral means sides. So this is a 4-sided figure. Can you think of any other words that have quad or lateral in them? Any words that have quad as a prefix? Yeah, quadricep. Have you ever heard the term quadricep? If you're a sports player or a runner, you might be told to stretch out your quads, right? It's a collection of 4 muscles in the leg. And then laterals, I think of bilateral talks. So if you have anyone who works in diplomacy, people who talk on 2 sides of a discussion are often called bilateral talks. So bi meaning 2 and lateral meaning sides. So let's come back to our shapes. Which shapes are not quadrilaterals? Can you identify them here on this side? Shapes that are not 4-sided shapes? So we know for sure that it can't be O, or P, or Q, because they're not polygons. Yeah, E is also not a quadrilateral. It has 6 sides, right? Let me get my pointer here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do you all know what a 6-sided figure is called? It's a hexagon. Do you see any other hexagons here, 6-sided figures? Yeah, M is one. I think that's it. Do you see any other shapes that are not quadrilaterals? That have more than 4 sides or fewer than 4 sides? Yep, letter L is a pentagon. You may recognize this shape. It's a 5-sided figure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's another one here. Do you see it? Another pentagon? Letter C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. Letter C is also a pentagon. Then there's one more shape here that doesn't fit as a quadrilateral. Do you see it? Letter I. Letter I is a triangle, 3 sides here, but the rest of these are all 4-sided shapes, and they are quadrilaterals. About quadrilaterals and polygons, let's get even more specific. Let's talk about trapezoids. So a trapezoid is a polygon, but it's also a quadrilateral. And a quadrilateral, as a trapezoid, is one that has at least one pair of opposite sides that are parallel. Do y'all remember the definition of what parallel means? Here we go, we have a little friend over here to help us. It's like railroad tracks, or 2 L's next to each other. That if I line top of my trapezoid, you see I did all 3 here, it should be parallel to its base, which is at the bottom. So you see if I extended these lines out in perpetuity, out for forever, they would never intersect. They will never cross over each other. And so that's the key definition of a trapezoid. It's a 4-sided figure, quadrilateral, but it has to have at least one pair of opposite sides that are parallel. So here we're back at our shapes. Now we know the ones that are not quadrilaterals, right? Because we've identified those in the previous slide. So P, Q, O, M is a hexagon, L is a pentagon, I is a rectangle, or excuse me, a triangle, and E, right? So we know that all of these are not going to fit into our categories here. So let's focus mainly on the ones that we have up here. So again, a trapezoid is a shape that has 4 sides, but where at least one set have parallel sides. So letter B, 1 set of parallel lines, let me get my pointer. 1 set of parallel lines, and another set, B. A also fits that category, 2 sides, 2 sets of parallel lines. J, K, does that work? Yep, at least 1 set of parallel lines. D, also a set of parallel lines. So what have we said? A, J, K, D, also at least 1 set of parallel lines. Yep, and N, at least 1 set of parallel lines. So here we have 3 left, F, G, and H. Are all of these shapes quadrilaterals? They all have 4 sides, closed plane figure? Yes, they are. But are they trapezoids? Do they have 1 set of parallel lines? If I extended this line all the way out, it would intersect with this one. Same thing here. If I had 1 set here, they would intersect somewhere, right? And same thing with H. So these are quadrilaterals. Whoops. These are quadrilaterals, but not trapezoids. All right, and then we're also going to talk about parallelograms today. So parallelograms are similar to trapezoids, but here's the difference. Both sets of parallel lines, both sets of opposite sides have to be parallel. So you see here, XW and YZ are parallel to each other, and WZ and XY are parallel to each other, and they are opposite sides. Of the shapes that we have here, which ones fit our definition for parallelograms, where both sides, or both, I should say, both sets of sides are parallel? So we have letter B, which we know is a trapezoid, but it's also a parallelogram because both sets are parallel. Yep, J, both sets of parallel sides. A, Any others? Yeah, letter D as well, right? 1 set of parallel lines, 2 sets of parallel lines. All right, good work, guys. All right, the last thing I want to talk about today with you all are rectangles and a rhombus. So a rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. You see them down here. All angles are right, all 90 degrees. A rhombus, on the other hand, is a quadrilateral with all sides of equal length. So rhombi are all about the sides, equal sides, while rectangles are all about that 90-degree angle on each corner. And as a note, the plural of rhombus is rhombi. So here is our new classification system, okay? So we know that all the shapes here, except for O, P, and Q, M, and L, E, and there's one more, I think. Nope, I think that's it. All of these are quadrilaterals. They are all four-sided figures. Oh, I knew there was one more. These are all four-sided figures, right? They are also some of them that are trapezoids, which we've identified, some that are parallelograms, and then we also have rectangles here. So A would fit our rectangle definition, all 90 degrees. J would also fit our rectangle definition. It would also be a square, right? And then the rest are rhombus, essentially, right? Where you have one set of parallel sides. T and R are going to be kite shapes. We're not going to get to that today, but that's a separate classification here. All right, so here's a little flow chart to help you understand. If you have a quadrilateral, it could be a trapezoid. A trapezoid could also be a parallelogram, right? And it could also be a rhombus or a rectangle. And both of those could also be a square. So here's just sort of a flow chart to give you an idea of how we identify and define these different shapes.
All right, thanks everyone for joining me today to learn about polygons and how to organize them into different categories and also how to define them. For more information on this lesson and so much more, please go visit the WTU website at WTUlocal6.net, and I'll see you around. Bye, everybody.